You ever notice how some people only show up when you start walking away? It's like emotional clockwork. You give them your attention, your time, your affection. They stay distant. Aloof, like connection is a threat. But the moment you start pulling back, reclaiming your emotional energy, boom, they're texting you more, getting curious, even borderline affectionate. What's going on? You might be dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. And here's the twist: when you pull away emotionally, that's when their fear of losing control kicks in. But don't get it twisted. This isn't them finally seeing your worth, it's them sensing your distance. And for avoidance, that's when the chase feels safe. Why? Because now you're not too close. You're not threatening their space. So they re-engage, not necessarily out of love, but to regain emotional control. They're not connecting more deeply. They're just trying to stop the shift in power. So you have to ask yourself, are they showing up for you or for the version of the dynamic they feel comfortable in? Because if they only show up when you're unavailable, you're not in a relationship, you're in a reaction loop. You pull back, they lean in. You get close, they retreat. And that's exhausting. What do? You don't play the same game. You set a standard. You let them know, my love isn't a reward you win back when I go cold. It's a consistent choice two people show up for. Because healthy love isn't about someone chasing you only when they feel you slipping. It's about someone who values you even when they have full access to your heart. When you emotionally pull away from someone with avoidant tendencies, their reaction can feel confusing, even contradictory. For days or weeks, they might have seemed distant, disengaged, or emotionally unavailable. You could have tried talking to them, opening up, or expressing a desire for deeper connection, only to be met with deflection, minimization, or silence. It's frustrating and often deeply painful, especially if you're someone who craves closeness and emotional security. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, when you finally reach your breaking point, when you stop texting first, stop making plans, or stop emotionally investing, they reappear. Suddenly, they're texting more, asking how you're doing, or even expressing concern or interest in reconnecting. On the surface, it might look like they've had a change of heart, like they've realized what they were missing. But that's not always the case. The truth is that for avoidance, emotional closeness feels threatening, not because they don't want love or care about you, but because closeness comes with expectations, vulnerability, and the possibility of being hurt. Deep down, many avoidant individuals associate intimacy with a loss of autonomy or pressure to perform emotionally. So when you were leaning in, when you were available, emotionally expressive, or seeking connection, it triggered their defense mechanisms. That emotional availability can overwhelm an avoidant partner, making them feel like they're being asked to meet needs they're unsure they can fulfill. Their instinct, often unconscious, is to create distance. They might do this by pulling back, becoming busy, downplaying emotions, or even finding fault in you as a way to justify their retreat. This is how they protect themselves from the perceived threat of being engulfed or emotionally overwhelmed. Now, when you start to emotionally pull away, something different happens. That threat, the one that closeness represented, begins to fade. You're no longer knocking on the door of connection. You've stepped back. To them, this creates space. That space feels safer. It's not a threat anymore. It's a signal that they can re-engage without being consumed. So paradoxically, the moment you stop seeking them is often the moment they start seeking you. But here's the important part: their re-engagement is not necessarily driven by a new desire for intimacy. It's often driven by a desire to regain emotional control. Avoidants often fear losing people, just like anyone else, but they fear the terms of emotional closeness more. When you pull away, it disrupts the dynamic they're used to, one where they get to decide the pace and proximity of the connection. If they've grown used to you being the one who initiates, who checks in, who accommodates their distance, your withdrawal feels like a shift in power. That makes them uncomfortable. It's not that they suddenly feel ready for a relationship or want to dive deep emotionally, it's that they feel out of control. And for avoidance, control is safety. So they reach out. They might send you a light, non-committal message to test the waters. They might ask how you're doing, comment on something small, or even pretend nothing happened. In some cases, they might go a step further, apologizing, expressing feelings, or suggesting they miss you. But if you respond with the same emotional intensity or desire for closeness that you had before, you may notice their interest fades again. Why? Because now that you're leaning in again, they feel the emotional pressure returning. Their defenses go back up. You're not imagining this pattern. You're caught in a cycle that isn't about genuine intimacy. It's about managing their emotional comfort zone. It's crucial to understand this, not as a way to demonize avoidance, but to recognize what's actually happening beneath the surface. Avoidant behavior is often rooted in past experiences, sometimes childhood dynamics where emotional closeness felt inconsistent, conditional, or overwhelming. For these individuals, vulnerability can feel like a trap, so when someone pulls away from them, they can finally breathe. The distance gives them the illusion of safety, and in that safety, they can afford to be curious again. But their re-engagement doesn't always mean they're ready to change the way they relate. It just means the anxiety of losing you now outweighs the anxiety of being close. If you've experienced this, you might be tempted to see their renewed attention as progress, as a breakthrough. But be careful, the attention you're getting now isn't necessarily sustainable. It's reactive. It's tied to your withdrawal, not to a new level of emotional availability on their part. That's why so many people in relationships with avoidant partners feel stuck in a painful loop. They pull away to protect themselves. Their partner leans in. Their partner backs off. They lean in. No one's ever on the same emotional page. That back and forth dynamic can become addictive because the moments of reconnection feel so rewarding. You think, they do care. And for a moment, it seems like things might change. But if the core issue, their fear of intimacy, hasn't been addressed, the pattern will repeat. The problem is, your emotional withdrawal becomes the only thing that keeps them engaged. It's not a healthy dynamic because your needs are never met unless you're withholding yourself. That's not love. That's emotional management. That's training yourself to be less expressive, less open, and less connected in order to keep someone else from running. And over time, that erodes your own self-esteem and emotional well-being. You start asking yourself what you're doing wrong, when in reality, you're playing a role in someone else's unresolved emotional pattern. Understanding that avoidants often act when you emotionally pull away, not because they want deeper love, but because they feel safer at a distance, helps you see their behavior for what it is, a reaction to their fear, not a reflection of your worth. When someone with avoidant tendencies suddenly starts giving you attention after you've emotionally pulled away, it's natural to feel hopeful. Maybe you think they finally realized what they were missing. Maybe it feels like they're waking up to the relationship or finally understanding how much you mean to them. But often, what you're seeing is not a genuine transformation or a deep emotional awakening. It's a shift triggered by something far more subtle, the loss of emotional control. Avoidant individuals tend to feel safest when they are in control of emotional proximity, when they know you're emotionally available, always texting first, forgiving quickly, making plans, and showing love openly. They may not consciously take it for granted, but they do rely on it. They know you're there, and because you're there, they don't feel a need to engage deeply. In fact, emotional availability from others can make avoidants feel pressured or even trapped. The more you want to get close, the more they may feel the need to protect themselves. By retreating, becoming less communicative, or emotionally detaching, this doesn't necessarily mean they don't care, but rather that they equate closeness with discomfort and distance with safety. When you finally pull away, whether intentionally or simply out of exhaustion, something changes in the dynamic. You're no longer as emotionally open or available. Your energy shifts. You stop reaching out, stop waiting on their responses, and start focusing on yourself. At that moment, a subtle but powerful signal is sent they are no longer the one in control of how connected you are. The emotional balance tips, and they feel it, consciously or not. That's when they often re-engage. It could be as small as a "How are you?" text, or as bold as a sudden interest in plans, flirtation, or even expressions of missing you. But their motive in doing so is rarely rooted in a new, deeper emotional commitment. It's often tied to the discomfort they feel when they no longer hold the reins in the relationship. For many avoidants, this re-engagement is about restoring equilibrium, not about creating emotional depth. They aren't necessarily asking, how do I build a stronger bond with this person? Instead, their actions are driven by a fear of losing control, or by the unease that comes from no longer being the emotionally distant one. When they sense that you've pulled away, it disrupts the emotional script they're used to. You're no longer the one pursuing, and that causes anxiety, not because they suddenly crave intimacy, but because the predictability they relied on is gone. Their response isn't about connection, it's about regaining familiarity and restoring emotional safety on their terms. This is where many people get caught. When the avoidant person comes back around, it can feel like progress. It can look like the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Maybe they're suddenly opening up a little or responding faster or seeming more affectionate. But if you observe closely, you'll often see that their engagement remains surface level. They may be physically present or more communicative for a while, but still not emotionally vulnerable. They may still avoid serious conversations, still keep you at arm's length, still resist defining the relationship or making plans that require long-term emotional investment. That's because their return is not about getting closer, it's about stopping the emotional shift. When you emotionally pull away, you disrupt the avoidant's internal balance. It's a change that challenges their comfort zone. Reaching out to you becomes a way to neutralize that discomfort. If they can get you to respond, to lean in again, to show them that you still care, then things feel manageable again. They don't have to dive into vulnerability or commitment. They just have to reset the emotional dynamic to something more familiar. In a way, it's about reassurance. Not reassurance for you, but for them. Your distance forces them to reckon with a version of you that no longer orbits around them. That makes them feel uncertain. Their actions are not necessarily about reconnecting with you emotionally. They're about reasserting that you are still there, that you haven't truly moved on, that they still have some unspoken influence over your emotions. It's emotional self-soothing, not emotional bonding. This is why, if you start engaging again, if you match their energy, start initiating more, or express that you're still invested, their attention often fades again. Once the emotional balance is restored and they feel safe, their need to pursue disappears. The pattern resets. You lean in, they lean out, and you're left wondering what happened. It's not because they were playing a conscious game, but because their instinct is to maintain emotional control. They don't feel comfortable when someone else has the upper hand emotionally and your withdrawal temporarily flips that script. So what feels like love or a reconnection might actually be something else entirely. It might be a reflex, an internal strategy to regulate their discomfort, not build intimacy. You're not being seen more clearly or valued more deeply. You're simply being pulled back into a role where they feel safe. That can be a painful realization, especially if you're someone who is emotionally open, loyal, and patient. It can feel like emotional whiplash. One moment they're distant, the next they're reaching out, and then they disappear again once you respond with warmth. This is why understanding the intention behind their behavior is so important. Attention that arises only in response to your distance isn't sustainable. It's reactive, not proactive. It's not built on shared vulnerability, mutual investment, or emotional consistency. Instead, it's based on their need to manage discomfort, not build closeness. And if their discomfort subsides once you've re-engaged, they may retreat again, leaving you caught in a cycle that feels both hopeful and disheartening. Avoidants often reappear when you pull away, not because they're ready to give more, but because they feel like they're losing grip on a dynamic they were controlling. Their fear of closeness hasn't vanished. It's simply taken a back seat to their fear of losing emotional control. So while their actions might look like care or even love, they are often a strategy to self-regulate, not a sign of deeper emotional change. Being in a dynamic with someone who is avoidant attachment can feel like emotional turbulence that never settles. One of the most exhausting parts is the reactive loop it creates. A cycle that becomes all too familiar. You pull away and they suddenly lean in. You get close again and they withdraw. It's an emotional pull that doesn't just affect your connection, it slowly wears down your confidence, clarity, and emotional well-being. And yet, because the moments of closeness feel so real, so needed, you may find yourself stuck in this rhythm, believing each return signals progress. At first, it might seem like the natural ebb and flow of any relationship. After all, don't people need space sometimes? Don't we all pull back or lean in depending on how we're feeling? But this isn't the same. This pattern is not rooted in healthy space or emotional rhythm. It's rooted in emotional fear and imbalance. For avoidance, closeness triggers discomfort. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection often feels unsafe or overwhelming. When things get emotionally intimate, their instinct is to protect themselves. That protection looks like distance, withdrawal, distraction, or even criticism of the relationship itself. So when you're emotionally available, open, present, seeking depth, they begin to feel that pressure. Whether it's spoken or unspoken, emotional closeness can feel like an expectation they don't know how to meet. Their fear is that getting too close will mean losing themselves, being engulfed, or being expected to show up in ways they don't feel capable of. This causes them to retreat, not always by physically leaving, but emotionally withdrawing. They may become vague in communication, inconsistent with affection, or suddenly focused on flaws or uncertainties. This withdrawal creates space, and in that space, you feel the gap. That's when, often out of hurt or self-protection, you start to pull away too. Here's where the loop tightens. Your pulling away removes the pressure they felt. You stop seeking emotional intimacy. You stop trying to connect, maybe even stop initiating contact altogether. From their perspective, that emotional demand is no longer there. Suddenly, you're not chasing them, not requiring anything from them. That change makes them feel safer, and in that safety, they re-emerge. They text again, ask how you are, even express that they've been thinking about you. But they're not doing this because they've had a transformation. They're reacting to the shift. You've stepped back, and now they feel a renewed sense of control over the emotional tone. To you, this feels like relief, like hope. You missed them, you wanted closeness, and now here they are. You let yourself believe they've come around, that maybe now they're finally seeing your worth or realizing what they had. So you open up again, you meet their energy, you lean in emotionally just like you did before. And just like before, they begin to retreat. That retreat may not be immediate, it may be slow, quiet, missed texts, less eye contact, shorter conversations. Or it might come with an excuse about not being ready, needing space, being overwhelmed. Regardless of how it shows up, it reinforces the same message. They only move toward you when you are emotionally out of reach. This constant loop of approach and withdrawal is what makes these dynamics so emotionally exhausting. You feel like you're being yanked back and forth, never knowing when the next retreat will come, constantly trying to adjust yourself in hopes of maintaining a sense of connection. Over time, this trains you to doubt your own needs. You begin to suppress your emotions, your desire for closeness, your instinct to connect. You start walking on eggshells, afraid that being too available will push them away again. Your entire emotional approach becomes a strategy, not a sincere expression of love. What makes this dynamic especially tricky is how validating the lean-in moments can be. The avoidant person's return often comes with just enough warmth, just enough vulnerability to make you believe things are changing. They may open up about something or tell you they miss you or remind you of the connection you once had. It feels intimate, but it's not consistent, it's reactive. It's happening not because emotional safety has been built, but because their fear of loss temporarily outweighed their fear of closeness. And then, once they feel reconnected and the emotional balance shifts again, once you're back to being available, they no longer feel the need to pursue. The fear is gone and the original discomfort returns. This flips the switch back to avoidance, and they retreat. The cycle continues, leaving you emotionally dizzy and unsure of what's real. It's important to recognize that this isn't a conscious game most avoidants are playing. They're not manipulating you maliciously. In many cases, they genuinely do care about you, but they're operating from a nervous system that sees closeness as danger and distance as relief. Their emotions are not stable or safe within the context of intimacy, so the relationship becomes a series of reactions instead of a shared emotional journey. You, on the other hand, may find yourself increasingly depleted, always hoping the next return will be the last retreat. You begin to shape your behavior around what keeps them around, often to the detriment of your own emotional truth. That's what makes this dynamic so damaging. It trains you to disconnect from yourself, to question your instincts, and to tolerate inconsistency as the cost of connection. The pull-push loop doesn't resolve on its own. As long as one person is regulating the connection based on fear, and the other is adjusting themselves to avoid triggering that fear, the dynamic stays reactive. It doesn't evolve into deeper intimacy, it just repeats. And every time it does, the emotional toll gets heavier. You lose a little more trust, a little more certainty, and eventually a little more of yourself in the process. When we talk about love that lasts, the kind that feels safe, Fulfilling and stable, it doesn't come from emotional games or power dynamics. It doesn't arise from someone pulling away to get attention or only showing up when they're afraid of losing you. Lasting connection is built on something far simpler and more powerful: consistency, the presence of two people who choose, day after day, to show up for one another, not perfectly, but reliably, with honesty, vulnerability, and care. But when you're in a relationship with someone who has avoidant tendencies, consistency often goes missing. Instead of building something steady together, you're left chasing breadcrumbs, moments of connection that feel amazing, but are often followed by periods of distance and confusion. These high and low emotional shifts create what feels like passion, but in reality, it's often a byproduct of emotional instability. It's not real intimacy, it's emotional whiplash. In healthy love, vulnerability isn't something one person punishes and the other withholds. It's something both people bring to the table with trust. It's being able to say, "I miss you," without fearing that you'll be met with silence. It's being able to ask for closeness without wondering if that request will scare the other person away. It's also being able to receive those same things from your partner without feeling threatened or pressured. That's where emotional maturity lives, in the ability to be seen and to see someone else without constantly bracing for retreat. The truth is, when a relationship is built on reactive behavior, where one person pulls back just to see if the other will chase, it becomes more about managing anxiety than building a life together. One person is constantly adapting, walking on eggshells, timing their emotional openness with caution. The other person is managing how close they can safely get without feeling suffocated. And neither is building true trust. They're managing distance, not cultivating closeness. Real intimacy can't be built on fear. It can't grow if every step toward each other is met with a step back. You can't build a home with someone who only knocks on your door when you lock it. Because love isn't supposed to feel like a test. It's not something you have to earn every time you stop giving. It's something you build by showing up fully, when it's convenient, and when it's not, when things feel good and when they feel uncertain. What a lot of people misunderstand is that being emotionally available doesn't mean being needy. Wanting closeness isn't a flaw. But in relationships where avoidance dominates, the person seeking connection is often labeled as too much or too intense, when really they're just responding to inconsistent emotional cues. They're trying to make sense of hot and cold behavior, and that uncertainty naturally leads to anxiety. So the person who wants connection starts adapting, becoming less expressive, less vulnerable, less open, all in the hopes that the other person will stay. But now both people are disconnected. One is afraid of intimacy, the other is afraid of being abandoned. And that's not connection, it's survival. In a healthy dynamic, neither person has to hide their feelings to maintain peace. There's room for emotional honesty. That doesn't mean there's no conflict or no fear, but it means those things can be talked about. They're not used as weapons or excuses to disappear. Both people take responsibility for how they show up, and both people are allowed to be human. That kind of consistency creates safety. It builds a foundation where love can actually deepen, instead of just looping through the same painful cycle. Avoidant partners often struggle with consistency because intimacy feels like a threat to their independence or sense of control. But the irony is, the more they avoid closeness, the less safe the relationship becomes for both people. Avoidance doesn't preserve freedom, it creates distance that erodes trust, and the partner on the receiving end begins to internalize the message that love is conditional, that they have to be less emotional or more distant themselves just to avoid being pushed away. That's not love, that's emotional self-editing. If you find yourself constantly adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering someone else's fears, you're not in a relationship, you're in an emotional negotiation, and the price you pay is authenticity. You lose the ability to express your needs honestly, and over time, you might even lose sight of what those needs are. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink or strategize. It invites you to be seen and to see the other person in their full humanity, fears, flaws, and all. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. People will have bad days, they'll need space, they'll make mistakes. But in a healthy relationship, space doesn't equal punishment, and mistakes don't lead to disappearance. There's communication, there's a pattern of return, there's effort. That's what makes love feel safe. Not grand gestures, not unpredictable highs, but the quiet, repeated act of choosing each other in everyday moments. Emotional games, Pulling away to get someone's attention, withholding affection to protect yourself, may feel powerful in the short term, but they build nothing of real value. They may create reaction, but not connection. And over time, they breed resentment. Because one person is always left carrying the emotional weight, waiting for the other to finally meet them halfway. To build a connection that lasts, both people have to be willing to engage with their fears, not run from them. That means talking about what closeness brings up. It means sitting with discomfort rather than using distance to avoid it. It means understanding that love is not about being pursued when you're silent. It's about being chosen even when you're fully present. And that kind of love doesn't require you to pull away to be seen. It requires you to stay and to be met there. When someone only seems to value you when you've become distant, it's a painful realization that can leave you questioning your worth. It often starts subtly. You're showing up consistently, offering your time, energy, and affection. You're invested, you're emotionally present, and yet their response is tepid. They're distracted, unavailable, or cool. You try harder, reach out more, show more patience, try to understand what they need. Still, the connection feels like a one-sided effort. Then something shifts. You get tired. You stop trying. You focus on yourself. Maybe you even begin to emotionally detach, not as a tactic, but out of self-preservation. That's when they suddenly take notice. They start texting, calling, asking questions. They seem more affectionate, more interested, more attentive. It's confusing, and in some ways, it feels validating, like they finally care. But what they're responding to isn't your value, it's your absence. This is one of the clearest signs that the dynamic you're in isn't rooted in genuine connection. If someone only starts showing interest when you've stopped trying, it means their attention is triggered by your distance, not your presence. They aren't seeing you for who you are. They're reacting to a shift in emotional power. That shift makes them feel uncertain, and it pulls them out of their emotional comfort zone. But this response is more about soothing their anxiety or reestablishing control than about finally appreciating you. A person who truly values you does, so when you're accessible, emotionally engaged, and present, they don't need you to disappear to remember your importance. In fact, your presence is what they cherish. They want to connect, not chase. They want to grow together, not play hide and seek with intimacy. When love is real, it isn't sparked by your absence. It deepens with your presence. It flourishes when both people are emotionally available, when there's a willingness to be seen and to see each other. What often keeps people stuck in these reactive dynamics is the brief but powerful sense of hope that follows the avoidant person's return. After so much distance, any display of warmth or pursuit feels significant. It gives you the illusion that the other person is finally waking up to the relationship. You interpret their behavior as change, as realization. And because it's something you've longed for, you want to believe in it. But more often than not, the renewed interest is short-lived. Once you start opening up again, once you become emotionally present, they retreat, they revert to old patterns because nothing internal has shifted. Their fear of intimacy hasn't been resolved. It was simply outweighed temporarily by the discomfort of your withdrawal. This cycle reinforces a harmful message that in order to be valued, you have to be unavailable. That you have to be distant, aloof, or emotionally withdrawn to spark interest. It teaches you that vulnerability pushes people away, and that withholding affection is the only way to keep someone engaged. Over time, this message damages your self-worth. You begin to associate love with performance, with strategy, with withholding pieces of yourself. You start asking how to be less emotional, less open, less too much, just to keep someone's attention. That's not connection, that's distortion. It's essential to remember that real relationships are built on mutual desire, not emotional power plays. They require two people who want to be there, who value presence over absence. When someone is emotionally healthy, your availability doesn't scare them. It draws them in. They're not afraid of your closeness. They welcome it. They see your vulnerability not as a burden, but as a bridge to deeper connection. They don't need the threat of losing you to realize what they have. There's a difference between being wanted and being missed. Being wanted means someone values you as you are, here and now. They don't need distance or drama to feel drawn to you. They're interested in the real-time version of you, the one who shows up, expresses, gives, and connects. Being missed, on the other hand, often means someone is reacting to avoid. They feel the loss, but that doesn't mean they're ready to engage with the fullness of who you are. It means they're feeling discomfort, not necessarily that they're willing to grow or change. It's tempting to mistake that reactive interest for love, to see their sudden attention as a sign that they finally care. But love that only shows up when you're no longer available isn't love. It's possession. It's control. It's a desire to regain what was lost without the willingness to nurture it when it was present. That kind of dynamic keeps you in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. It teaches you to disappear to be desired, to detach in order to matter. And that's not sustainable. It's not healthy. And it's not fair to you. You deserve a connection that thrives in your presence. A relationship where your emotional availability is met with gratitude, not avoidance. Where your consistency is matched, not punished. Where you don't have to disappear to feel seen. Real intimacy is not a game of tug of war. It's a shared effort. It's both people choosing, and again, to show up even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they're afraid. When you find someone who values your presence, they won't make you earn their affection by pulling away. They won't need distance to recognize your worth. They'll meet you where you are, emotionally, honestly, and willingly. And that's where love lives. Not in the moment someone fears losing you, but in the quiet, steady moments when they choose to keep you close. So if you're in a dynamic where someone only shows up when you pull away, ask yourself, is this love or is this a loop? Because real connection isn't built on your silence, it's built on your presence. You shouldn't have to disappear to be seen. You shouldn't have to withhold love just to be treated like you matter. If someone values you, they'll show it when you're close. They'll meet you in the middle, not just chase you from behind. Choose the kind of love that chooses you even when you're fully available. The kind that sees your heart, respects your openness, and doesn't need you to shrink just to stay. You're not here to perform, to prove, or to pull away just to get scraps of affection. You're here to be met fully, honestly, and consistently. Thank you for giving your time, your energy, and most of all, your heart to this message. If something here resonated with you, let that be a reminder you're not too much and your needs aren't too big. You just haven't been met with the right kind of presence yet. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and keep showing up for the kind of love that doesn't make you guess. I appreciate you. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and remember the right love doesn't run when you show up. It stands beside you. Thank you.